Hello, everyone. I'm Kimonas Sotirchos. I'm a software engineer at Aricto, and I'm really happy to present to you and give you a tour of our new Katib UI that we've been working on for Kubeflow and get you all up to speed with what's happening, what's our state right now, and what is the future roadmap for this UI and its integrations. So this is just a quick overview of the UI. It's intended to be we've only changed the front end of the application, not the back end. So the UI is also designed to work both if you installed Katib as a standalone component, so you can also use the web app as it is, and it can also be integrated as part of Kubeflow. And actually, the integration with Kubeflow was one of the main reasons when we were considering about creating this updated UI. And one of the main reasons was we wanted all of the web apps of Kubeflow, and we want them to have a consistent UX. Whether this means this means how do we actually handle our objects, as well as how do we the visuals of these applications, because this will help make Kubeflow a more cohesive platform. And of course, another very big argument was the utilization of common code. For those that are not aware, for the rest of the Kubeflow components and the web apps, for KF serving, for notebooks, for volumes, we have a lot of common code where we share a lot of functionalities. So this is why we wanted to also integrate Katib with this common code. So all of the web apps start converging, and this essentially also reduces the maintenance effort, since we factor out a lot of the code. So to be a little bit more specific, the reason about the UX was because while the current UI is very robust and allows you to do almost everything with the experiment CRs, the integration with the Kubeflow dashboard was a little bit lacking, at least visually. So this is why we wanted to to better integrate it. And for reference, here's how, for example, the notebooks web app integrates with the dashboard, or the models, the inference services web app. So we wanted to have Katib to also follow these principles, so all of the components of Kubeflow can bind together more naturally. Although again, you can definitely use the web app as a standalone component if you only want to install Katib. So this was just a rationale because we were also using Kubeflow. You can very easily also use this new UI by using an upstream image we have. It's very simple. You'll have to just use the Katib/new/UI instead of the Katib UI. For this UI is available for 1.3. Although for 1.3 the default one is the previous one, the one that we've had for up until this point. And the reason for this is that we want to make sure that we've supported all of the functionalities of the previous UI in the new UI before we actually make the switch, to ensure that the best user experience with the new UI, and that there won't be huge regressions in using the new UI. So at this point, because I'm talking about a UI, I think it will be better if I just actually make a demo. So let's get to it and see how it will look. So this is a Kubeflow installation. It's using the latest 1.3 manifests. And the only change I've done here is that, as I mentioned, I've used the updated image for the experiment for the Katib UI. So what we're going to do right now, and I think it really binds nicely with Jochn's presentation, is that we're actually going to create live an experiment from the form. So we're actually going to see how we can manipulate all of the fields that Jochen previously showed about the experiment. We'll see how we can actually configure them from the new UI's form. So a small design note here. Our goal was to be, since the Katib UI has excellent documentation and a lot of options, we want to also add some small documentation notes so that people can be aware of what on which part are they working on, and also have a quick access to the docs. So keep in mind, also take a look at the right-hand annotations for what's going on. So right now I'm going to create an experiment from the upstream Katib repo. I'm going to create the Bayesian experiment. And we're actually going to mostly use all of these fields to create this experiment via the UI. So let's actually start by naming demo. For the Kubeflow case, the namespace is disabled because you're only allowed to select the namespaces from the central dashboard. This is done so that we can ensure that users only view the experiments that they have permissions on. So this is why the namespace is grayed out. Although in the standalone mode, you could have a drop-down from which you could select any namespace you'd like. Next up, we have the most basic configurations of the trial, which is the thresholds. How many trials do we want, the maximum number of trials, the failed trials, as well as the resume policy, which Jofnu mentioned if we would like to continue from a PVC or have it long running, or actually never resume. I'll keep it long running, which is the default. And I'll also actually keep let's see, 3, 12, 3. Let's keep it as it is. Okay, the default ones. So the next important part is, as Jofnu showed, the objective, which is the goal of what this experiment tries to achieve. In this case, we will want to maximize the, let me get the name, make sure I get the name correct. We want to maximize the validation accuracy, and we will also have an additional train metric. So we want to maximize the validation accuracy, and we have an additional train metric. We don't have any specific metric strategies, so we'll just leave this field untouched. Although I just wanted to show you that you can also configure this as well. So for the next part, which is the most interesting one, is the selection of the search algorithm. For Katib, the Katib experiment currently supports 2 modes and 2 types of algorithms: hyperparameter tuning, which is the most stable component right now, and also neural architecture search, which is also gaining ground. So as you can see, by selecting different type of algorithm, it will also affect the next sections that you will see in the form. So over here, since we're doing a Bayesian optimization, we'll do hyperparameter tuning. So we will select the Bayesian optimization. And what the UI will allow us to do is, and this is one of the improvements from the previous iteration, is that it will also show us all of the parameters that we can configure for an algorithm. The workflow previously would be for a user to open the docs, and everything is very beautifully documented for every algorithm, what are the parameters they could set, etc., for its algorithm. But the issue here is that users would need to have the docs opened all the time. So to avoid this user experience, we believe the UI would assist here by actually showing you the full list of the parameters that you could set for any algorithm and have the default values that would be used either way. So as you can see, each algorithm has its own parameters, so you don't have to actually remember all of them. So back to Bayesian optimization. If I remember correctly, the experiment only was overriding the random state parameter. So this is what we're going to do as well. We're going to use everything else, keep the default values, and set a random state to 10. Okay. So next up is early stopping, which, if I remember correctly, it was the Bayesian example is not using an early stopping. Although we can just briefly take a look. It's essentially has this just an algorithm for detecting if we would like to stop a little bit earlier the training, but we're not going to use it right now. But have in mind that you can also select it from the UI. Next, the very, very important section after the algorithm is the hyperparameters that we want to choose for the specific experiment. And these hyperparameters will be used for creating the underlying trials. We find it useful and also give an estimation of how many different trials will be created. This will be helpful because a user can immediately understand that, hey, it's going to be 576 trials, so this is probably going to take too many resources. And here we are editing the parameters for this algorithm. If I remember correctly, it's also using these values. So it's LR, number of layers, and optimizer. Although for the number of layers, we're using a smaller range because 1 to 64 results in a huge space. So let's actually do it. 2 to 5. We can also briefly scroll over and see more details about each parameter. We can delete or edit it again. And of course, we can add a new parameter if we would like. For now, I'm just going to use the default ones. For the metrics collector, we're going to use the standard std out, which will create a sidecar that will be monitoring the training process. And last but not least, and actually the most important part, is the trial template. And in this section is where we defined what's going to be the spec of the trial worker. As Jofnu mentioned in the previous iteration, in his presentation, we have Katib supports a lot of different workers. It supports batch jobs, Tecton pipelines, TF job, PyTorch jobs. But in this case, and you can also, the experiment CR allows you to also have the trial specs stored in a config map. So, and by default, it has some config maps in the Kubeflow namespace. So we could also select a trial template based on the already deployed templates. But in this case, I'm actually going to use to directly set a YAML. So instead of a config map, I'm going to use the YAML. Also, we have some more advanced sections like if we want to retain or the success conditions and failure conditions. Again, every value here is the default one, so you can feel comfortable about leaving them as they are. And let's actually also edit the YAML. From here, I'm going to copy paste from the example, and actually let me make sure it's properly formatted. Okay, copy it. So, and also notice that the UI can automatically detect the templated parameters and creates entries for them. So if I would delete this, I wouldn't be seeing this parameter anymore. So these are these values will get filled in once for its trial. So its trial will have a specific instance of the search space. And what we have only need to do here is to actually match the parameters from the YAML to the actual parameters from the experiment that we defined above. So we have LR, number of layers, and optimizer. So this is what we're actually going to do here. This will be the LR, layers, and optimizer. And now we're almost ready to submit the YAML, but before we do, the UI also allows us to edit the final YAML before it gets submitted. And this is one lesson we've learned from the notebooks UI, in which it does not allow you to set a YAML, and this will inevitably limit users because at some point the UI might get a little bit behind and not support some of the latest features of ACR. So by allowing the users to edit the YAML, they can always be sure to edit the most advanced settings they have. So as we can see, these are all the settings that we configured above: our trial template, our values, our random state that we set to a specific value. Of course, we can also change it to something else, but I'll keep it as is. So let's try and create the experiment. And there it goes. The experiment got created, and we see it in the main list of the experiments. So the next step will be to actually click on the experiment. Right now it's in the early stages, so it hasn't started yet. And also I've done some very bad last minute modifications to my infra. So this example is most probably not going to work, but I have an example from Kale that I'm going to also show you. Oh, okay. So the trials have actually started. We have 3 running trials. And the reason right now they're black is because they haven't returned any validation accuracy bug, but we can very quickly filter out and see the configurations from its trial. So just a quick navigation to this page. We have an overview, which is just the most important things, the status, which is the live progress of the experiment, and some important information like the defined goal and how many trials are actually running, and of course the experiment conditions. Next, we can also see the actual trials that are running for the experiment right now. There are also a lot of good optimizations that we can do over here in terms of simple UI changes like hovering on this, hovering and selecting trials from this page. But we can also discuss them a little bit later and hear your feedback as well. Next up, we have the detailed section, which is essentially the spec defined in a more user-friendly way, so users can focus on the specific areas of the experiment, like the collector, the algorithm, the parameters. And last but not least, they can also view the YAML of the experiment as it is right now in the cluster. So we can see that from the status, there are 3 running trials, and of course, the rest of the experiment. So let me actually also show you a completed experiment. So you would also see different colors from a completed experiment. So which would be even a little bit more helpful. And the UI will also show you the best, what was the name of the best trial and the best parameters so that you can use them. A small comment, since we talked about Kale. As I mentioned, in Kale, its pipeline is a job that is its trial, is a job that creates an underlying pipeline and waits for it to succeed. So we've also added a feature to the UI to allow you to navigate to a pipeline for an experiment. And the way this works is if the underlying trial will have a specific annotation that mentions what is the UID of the pipeline, then there will be a button over here so we can click it. So keeping in mind that if you'd like to do a similar thing and launch your own pipelines, if you have a mechanism to also mark the trials with the pipeline ID, then the UI will also allow you to make a quick link between the Katib UI and the pipelines UI. And this is for example, the specific pipeline that ran for this trial. So last but not least, in the main page as well, you can also have a quick browse and see what is going on with the experiment. What is the best optimal trial at the current point? You can see the metrics and the parameters. And all in all, this is the current state of the new UI right now. Again, one of the main points was the use of the common code and the better integration with the rest of the Kubeflow components. So we have some same UX across our web apps. And of course, I'm going to talk about the future of this web app in the subsequent section. So before I jump back to the slides, are there any questions that you would like to discuss now that I have it open over here, or would like me to show you?
Yeah, I think it's great to add this. If you have any suggestion or feedback about the UI perspective, please let us know right now. What do you feel about like how we will submit the experiment, how you will see the experiment? Yeah, do you have any feedback from our users? Does it look good to you?
Hello. Yes.
Hey.
I have a question. We have integrated Katib with the Kubeflow pipeline experiments, but now I see in the UI it's kind of separated. So I don't know if we need to combine both, how one might do it.
So if I understand correctly, what do you mean that you've integrated the experiments with pipelines?
So what we did is Katib runs the Kubeflow pipeline components, the KFT components, and then the feedback from the components is given to Katib for the hyperparameters.
So, and how the trial would also, how would that the actual, if I understand correctly, the underlying trial would create a pipeline, or would a pipeline create an experiment? This is what it's not clear to me.
hold on, let me see. I think, yeah, the Katib experiment uses the KFP components that we have.
Okay, so is there some feedback that you would like it to be for how they could be integrated better together that you would like to?
No, I'm asking if now I see the experiment is using the AutoML, so I'm not sure if it's still possible that we use the KFP components or no.
Ah, wait, I think I got you. You meant the KFP experiments, right? Or not? We have the AutoML experiments. It's a CRD named experiment in both cases, but the one is managed by KFP, while the other is managed from AutoML.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to add this, yeah, this is like a little bit confused for our users because we changed like our central dashboard UI. But eventually you definitely have all of the Kubeflow pipelines functionality on the dashboard that you had before.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was my question.
Ah, okay. Sorry then if I got around too much.
By the way, to add this, I know that it can be looks a lot of confusing part that Katib has like experiment CR and Kubeflow pipelines also has an experiment CR. And I don't know, we can discuss about it in our Q&A session because we probably need to rethink about the naming in the Katib.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, good point, Andre, indeed.
I think when we display that in the central dashboard Kimonas, I think we will need probably like under tuning, we might need a different drop-down text probably. I think that would alleviate all these confusions.
Over here, you mean the central dashboard, right?
Yes.
I think the bigger problem here, it's like our intention was why we're naming Katib to experiment that user doesn't really care about the naming, right? They're caring about what they want to do. And that is why we named here experiments AutoML and experiments KFP. So because Katib can be like sometimes confusing for the users, like what do they want to achieve from the Kubeflow central dashboard?
Right. I meant to, for example, we could have a generic name, probably like tuning or something like that, model tuning. So that way we don't need to even expose whether like it is AutoML experiment or KFP experiment, right? We can have a general term for that.
Yeah, by the way, that is a good point. Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
No, yeah, it's also a good point. I remember the initial thought was to actually expose the underlined object that people can integrate with Kubeflow rather than higher level abstractions. But let's actually discuss it again more and hear more user feedback, because indeed, if this is confusing, then we can redesign and rethink how we want to have it.
Right. Yeah. I think we have heard very similar comments from users. I think it is a bit confusing because it's all same experiment which is given, right? For someone who's seeing the central dashboard for the first time, will have the same question. Yeah.
I will actually go ahead.
From my end, it's a bit confusing because for AutoML, when I see it, I think of the GCP AutoML. So this is maybe a bit, that's why I found it a bit confusing.
Thanks, Patrick. I think that is quite useful. We'll track that in our issue in Kubeflow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let's definitely create an issue. And Patrick, can you give like your idea? I just want to see you in the issue because we really want to hear like the feedback, how to name it, and we can move forward with these questions. Also, because like again, this is important how we show these CRs in the central dashboard. By the way, just another question from the chat that I saw, like about the running clocks. This is a very interesting question, and we do have an issue for that. Let me actually post it. So we definitely in the new UI we want to integrate the logging part from the trials that user doesn't want to. We will not interact with the CLI. So this one, the issue about the logs.
Exactly. I have it in the roadmap, and well, I'll show in a little bit. But yeah, showing the logs, and also events from the trials, and the suggestion pod is very useful. Essentially, ideally, we would like to expose everything a user would like to do with kubectl via the UI. So whether this is logs, events, which would you get with describe, all of this is our points that we want to integrate with Katib to allow them people to just do everything they would do with kubectl just via the UI. So yeah, we have plans for it, and we're tracking this effort.
Okay. And by the way, like I post the link about the issue, and in the meantime, I also will post the link about our roadmap for the new Katib UI if you're interested. So if you just want to track the progress, feel free to track this project in our email.
And also feel free to create any issues with suggestions of how would you like us to improve the UI further.
Definitely.
So
any other questions? Yeah, from the front end side.
Yeah.
Victor, you want to say something? You on mute. Okay.
May I ask another question?
Yep, sure.
Considering the new experiment page, if there are so many hyperparameters to enter in, then user may feel a bit uncomfortable with to add all parameters, maybe more than 20 or 30 by click buttons. So I think if Katib UI supports for enter all parameters at once with just JSON format string or by just downloading file would be more useful.
Yeah, I think it's a great actually point, Kimonas. What do you think?
Yeah, indeed. It would be very useful.
Because imagine if the users want to tune around 15 or 20 parameters, they need to expand all of them in the UI, and that can take some time. So your like feature request just download parameters from the file, right? Is it correct?
Yeah, right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
If possible, can you create a issue so that like we can track that?
You asked me to create an issue on Katib.
Yeah, so that way you would also understand the progress on that. It will help the community.
Okay, I'll add you that issue. Okay.
Thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so at this point, I think are there any other questions about the UI or feedback I'd like to give? Okay, so this will continue from here. So that was the UI as you saw it live. Again, you can try it out as well by just switching the image name. So feel free to do so and create any new issues with features that you'd like to see, so we can also track and start implementing them. But as we mentioned, right now, the reason we haven't made the switch until this point is that because the current UI, while it has some visual improvements, it's also missing some essential functionality from the current UI, which we would like to make sure it's there before we switch. And it's two very important points. The first one is the current UI allowed us to actually be able to configure the trial templates. The trial templates are config maps that hold values for the trials, for the spec of the trials. So the previous UI would give you an easy way and a distinct page for managing these config maps, editing them, deleting them, etc. So this way, the web app is mostly a self-service where a user can also select their trial templates. Although there is some considerations about the security here, like where will these trials live? These config maps live? Should they always live in a specific namespace? Should they be user namespace? But these are things that we're considering. But at this point, what we want to achieve is just the new UI to have the same functionality and allow users to edit the config maps as the current UI. And just a small technical detail: the way this works until now is that the UI would only filter config maps that have a specific annotation. So it's not like it will allow you to edit any config map you want, but mostly config maps with a specific annotation which is for specifying that, hey, this config is just for Katib. So this is the one. And the second quite important part is right now we're missing the NAS graph visualization. So once you create the user can create a NAS experiment from the UI, right now in the main page where you see an experiment where we have this base graph, while we have a visualization option for the hyperparameter tuning where you can see all of the parameters, we don't currently have this for the NAS graph. So again, most probably we're going to just imitate what the current UI does so that we ensure that this functionality is there. And last but not least, let's also discuss about the roadmap. This is one of the things that we were currently tracking. As mentioned, it's mostly the first two are to ensure the new Katib UI is on par with the existing one. And we want to expose, as Andrew mentioned, more and more logs, starting from the suggestion pod, and then we can definitely move to actually showing more information about the underlying trials. We also want to have a way to sort the trials so the user does not have to just search with their eye and figure out and navigate between trials. So we would add some searching and filtering functionality and sorting to view the best trials quite easily. And lastly, we're also discussing about how we can improve the authorization in the backend of the application, because right now the web application does not perform any authorization checks. This means that the user from the browser could make a request to list all of the experiments from other namespaces. But this is a high priority for us, and we're actually discussing on how to mitigate this. And we're going to do what we do for the other web applications, where the backend will use Kubernetes subject access reviews to ensure that a user is authorized to perform an action in namespace. So this is the current roadmap. I forgot to add the link from the GitHub or from the GitHub project we have for the UI, but I think Andrew added this for the chat. So thanks, Andrew. And feel free to give us to create any issue, to even discuss a feature that you think that would make sense, so we can also schedule it. So with this, thank you very much for listening to the presentation. I'm open to discussing any last things if you'd like. And yeah, thank you very much. Let me actually stop sharing as well.
Thank you for this great presentation. Since we have a couple of audience here, please, do you have any feedback about the UI? Because we really want to record them, and any your suggestion, we want to create an issue and integrate them in upstream.
Yeah, one of our aim is to give UI experience to all first level or medium users and command line for the advanced users. So that is the experience that we are actually planning to have. So if we have some thoughts on it, it would be great. And then we'll try to track that.
Also, I think we have some time to discuss some Kale questions that we want to touch on this UI session. So I think the question was from Ayush, right? I don't know, do we want to discuss the Kale questions right now and the UI integration?
I don't have an issue personally about discussing it, although I'm not super familiar with the very, very low level details, so I might not be able to help much. But yeah, if people would have some questions like how with Kale and the experiment, and maybe how they could also integrate with the UI, sure, let's have some discussion.
Yeah, I think definitely one, as like as we mentioned before, we definitely need to explain users how to use Kubeflow pipelines under Katib. So this can be done in the separate issue. We can discuss about it. Yeah. So Patrick, did you just share some image?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I checked. It's actually in reverse. So we're using KFP to launch Katib experiments, and then we're using the feedback from the Katib component to run the trials. So they're not showing in. I have the new UI. It's not showing in AutoML, so I think it's independent. I'm not sure.
Oh, I see. So, so is it correct that you is exactly running the Katib from your Kubeflow pipeline? So the Katib is just one of the components, right?
Yes, correct.
So we definitely should see this page actually on the new central dashboard in the runs section. Is it right, Kimonas?
Yes, you should
yeah,
see that. Just that if you select the namespace where you're running, I think you should. There should not be any issues in seeing this in Katib UI.
Yeah, that's what I would comment as well. Except if I'm missing something.
Yeah, because currently I think we don't have the link from the Kubeflow pipelines to the Katib UI because this is we don't have this sort of the integration. But if you're using like SDK, you should be able to like open the Katib UI from your notebook. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right now, yeah, we're using the SDK pipeline. From the pipeline, we're using the Katib as the component. We modified one of the components that was in the GitHub. We modified it so it becomes a bit more dynamic, and it's running the experiment. So I can see the experiment in the. I can see the experiment running inside the pods on the Kubeflow cluster. But if I click on the UI inside the KF cluster, I don't see the experiments.
Oh, I see. It might be an issue with integration with Kubeflow pipelines and Katib component. So in that case, I would just recommend to create an issue for that, so we can just follow.
Okay. So yeah, actually, my main question is maybe is this the correct way to do things if you want something dynamic to run Katib from inside the KFP pipeline?
Yeah, exactly. This is like the correct way because I don't know if you just follow up the previous session, which I alluded at about the end-to-end workflow, but eventually, yes, Katib should be can be part of your Kubeflow pipeline where you can just tune your hyperparameters, and then you can pass these hyperparameters to your training job or to any sort of the other MLOps infrastructure.
Okay, great. So I just opened the issue for the.
Yep, sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any feedback regarding to the UI? Or any questions?
Oh, let me also.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Apologies for interrupting. Just a small feedback that I forgot to mention. We're doing this for all of the web apps, but we are changing the styles from the first page of the table to be as close as possible with pipelines, so that all of the UIs look similar. And alongside this effort, we're also going to be adding filtering and selecting multiple experiments and pagination and all of these small features to the UI for experiments as well. Just a small comment that we're going to make it look more like the pipelines UI. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, go ahead with the question. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. When describing a Katib experiment page, there is one graph showing all trials with each objective metric and all hyperparameters. But I think sometimes users would like to hide some hyperparameters on graph interactively to focus on some specific hyperparameters. So I think if this feature,
Oh.
yeah,
So you mean like you have the graph with a parallel axis, but some people would only want to isolate specific two parameters and see
that's right.
the
Yeah,
trials based on
exactly.
this. Oh, that's also a very nice suggestion. Yeah. Because they can, especially there are many parameters, they can only allocate specific parameters that they would like to see.
But the
I'm
question is
writing.
how we can define which parameters they want to see. It depends on the accuracy results or depends on the objective metric value.
I think if there is some toggle button, that would be nice. Then user can choose which parameters to hide or not.
So for example, just point me if I understand correctly. So basically you want to see like top K hyperparameters from all of your AutoML job, right? Hyperparameter job.
May I
Not
share my
just
screen? I
for-
think I understand.
Yeah, sure.
Give me a second.
Okay.
So I think the proposal was to, when I see all of the parameters here, I only want to visualize the batch size and the embedded dimensions. So I can click on the LR and completely hide it. I can click on all of the other columns and hide them. So the final graph will only contain LR and batch size and embedded dimensions, those two. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
It's mostly UI change about specifying which parameters to show, toggle them on and off.
Right, probably like a way to select hyperparameters and dynamically it will get added, something like that.
Yeah, I think this is a good point because like imagine if users have like around 100 parameters, they don't really want to see all of them in the graph, and maybe they can see like the distribution across like maybe only 20 parameters, right? So yeah, I think this is a good point. Can you please create an issue for that as well, in addition to download permission of the file? Okay.
Yeah, I will.
Sounds good. Yeah, because definitely we want to see like more plots to show the users how the hyperparameter job is flowing, maybe about the metrics results as well. So they can maybe make some comparison between different trials and to see how they can improve it. So we definitely want to hear the feedback because currently we have only two plots, which is show only the metrics results and the optimal parameters from your objective value. Yeah, so this is one thing that we can discuss.